And then the last favorable, unfavorable was the Minneapolis Police Department, 28% favorable, 55% unfavorable. I don't think that's a surprising result.
I think it is interesting that Mayor Frey is approaching MPD levels of unfavorability.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
I don't know if you heard, Josh, but I'm a drive time radio veteran. Did you happen to listen to my appearance on Drive?
I did listen to your drive time radio debut.
I'm not going to let anyone forget it that I've been on Drive Time Radio with Jason DeRusha. Thank you, Jason DeRusha, who is now, I consider him a friend after spending like half an hour with him on Drive Time Radio. And so I was thinking of, by the way, this is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm John Edwards. Josh Martin is my co-pilot here today. And I was thinking of doing a thing where I try to mimic the characteristics of Drive Time Radio. You know, they do a thing at the beginning of the hour where they read the news, they read headlines, the big things that are happening.
Oh, yeah.
They play like newsy music to do that. Let me see if I have some newsy music here. Because there's a lot going on in the news, Josh. I don't know if you've been paying attention. Today was a big, juicy news day. We have so much to talk about.
It was big news day. We do have a lot to talk about.
Josh, can you throw it to me as your news reader? Say, now to John Edwards, our news reader, or something like that. Something you would hear on Drive Time Radio.
Yeah, and now to John Edwards will be reading today's news.
Okay, it's 5:04, August 15th. Here's today's headlines. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey announces a $1.8 billion budget for 2024, which will be amended and approved by the City Council in December. The budget includes $217 million for the Minneapolis Police Department. In other news, 38 candidates have filed to be on the ballot for this year's City Council election. Voters will be electing representatives for each of the 13 wards. I'd say only 20 of them have any chance of winning. A new PAC called Minneapolis for the Many has launched a campaign to elect a progressive City Council majority. As part of their announcement, they released a poll showing Mayor Frey is nearly as unpopular as our national disgrace of a police department. Sources tell Wedge Live the PAC has a goal of raising at least $200,000 for this year's election. And finally, a rideshare ordinance to ensure the equivalent of the Minneapolis minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers is headed for a vote by the City Council on Thursday, with questions swirling about whether the mayor will veto. What do we think, Josh? Was that like a really good professional sounding series of headlines there?
I think so. I think that worked well, and today was a good day to do that since it was a big news day.
You want to talk about the candidates who have filed? Did Mark Globus? I know you've been sitting on the edge of your seat all day waiting for whether Mark Globus would file in Ward 7. Do we have any news on that?
So we actually do. It looks like he did not, because we have breaking right now.
Wait, let me play the music. Let me play the music.
Yeah.
Okay, go, Josh.
So Minneapolis Elections and Voter Services just posted on Twitter that that's a wrap on 2023 candidate filing. 38 candidates filed to run for city council, just as you said. So if anyone who wasn't on the list before has not filed.
Okay. Thank you to Mark Globus for wasting our time. We talked about Mark Globus maybe about 30 seconds between the two of us, and it was way too much time we wasted.
30 seconds we could have used doing something better, yeah.
So my most memorable Mark Globus moment let's waste some more time on Mark Globus since he's not actually running. So what's the guy's name? Ken Foxworth? Is that his name?
Ken Foxworth, yep. He is another one of the other candidates in Ward 7.
So-
he actually did file.
Yeah, he showed up to the DFL convention, but he wasn't a delegate and he didn't have any supporters there, so no one was there to nominate him. And the other candidate, his competitor, Mark Globus, stepped in and he nominated Ken Foxworth. So what an honorable moment for Mark Globus to nominate his fellow candidate when he didn't have any support at the convention. Neither one of them had a chance. They're both wasting our time, basically. It's Katie Cashman or Scott Graham. Those are your choices in Ward 7, sorry.
Yeah, we'll start in the middle of the wards.
Yeah. What did I say yesterday were my battleground wards, the ones that are actually competitive? Was it 5, 6, 7, 8, and 12? And then 13 is fun to watch.
I think that's... I would agree with that assessment.
So you would make no corrections to my battleground wards of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 12?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's possible something weird will happen in a different race and something will start to shape up elsewhere. But like as of now, when we're recording this, yeah, I think those are the battleground wards.
And I don't even know how I feel about 7. 7, I always get my hopes up about every year, and I think somebody good will win. Well, they spent 25 years, a quarter century, re-electing Lisa Goodman for a reason. That's a tough one.
But it is an open seat this year, and
True.
and Katie Cashman did manage to block Scott Graham from getting the DFL endorsement. So I'd say it's already shaping up to be more competitive than I thought it would be.
But to be pessimistic for a moment, it is 2023. We weren't supposed to have an election this year, but the laws happened and forced us to have an off year city council election with no mayor on the ballot. So the electorate this year could be super conservative. I don't know. Ward 5, we have Victor Martinez, notorious Trumper, against Jeremiah Ellison, the progressive incumbent. I think I give Jeremiah the edge here. I think he should have an easier time. I don't know. 2023 dynamics are different from 2021. Martinez ran last time around. Maybe more people realize that Victor Martinez is... if you're touting the police union endorsement in 2023, it could be a bad sign.
Yeah. I think there's reasons to be hopeful here. Martinez did come close in 21, but... environment's changed. A lot more people are aware of where Victor Martinez's allegiances and positions lie now. The Police Federation endorsement is a choice. No other candidate that I'm aware has chosen to do that. There also, I think Ellison's campaign probably is aware that unfortunately, Victor Martinez needs to be taken somewhat seriously, so they may not be caught unawares as in 2021.
Ward 5 is a strange place where you can have wild flips ideologically. Same with Ward 4. North Minneapolis is like that. There's lots of very progressive people and lots of like very old guard, very conservative voters. So,
well, and Ward 4 and Ward 5 both have very low turnout, so that may be what contributes to that variability. It's just a function of who shows up.
It's a good reminder, Josh Martin, if people just voted, the more people should vote. Pay attention to city elections, because fewer and fewer people vote in city elections than in the congressional elections, and fewer even still than presidential elections. Just tell your friends, because anyone listening to this podcast is definitely already voting. I don't need to waste my time telling you to vote, but bring your friends along to vote too. Volunteer for a campaign. Make a difference that way. Ward 6. You handle Ward 6. You give me your analysis of Ward 6.
Oh, all right. Sean's like, I'm not touching this one. This is your problem. All right. So Ward 6 is a challenge to analyze. Jamal Osman is the incumbent there. He had some ethical issues.
He fell
let's
short.
say.
He fell short of ethical aspirations, I would say.
He fell short of some ethical aspirations for an elected official. Now he has not been. We should say he has not been charged with anything yet, let alone
We have
convicted
to
of
say
anything.
allegedly.
But there's been a lot of reporting about some ties with him being involved in the Feeding Our Future scandal. So that's probably not great for him.
Yeah. Both him with an organization he founded that he apparently stepped away from before the trouble hit, and his wife had a separate organization who is being connected to the Feeding Our Future scandal. So
Osmond's also a little hard to pin down ideologically on the council.
He's a flipper. He's in the middle.
Yeah, I guess we kind of classify him as a moderate, but I think it varies on the issue.
There's no discernible ideology to Jamal Osmond that I can tell. It's by the day, whatever the mood is.
Well, and I do think that in some ways he is trying to represent his ward. He's certainly, I think, out of step with some of his usual allies on issues like rent control and, for instance, this Uber Lyft bill going on right now. But that's because those are issues that are very important to his constituents. So that maybe explains some of that. But yes, there is also a little bit of, it's just not clear what he'll do at a given moment.
Yeah.
So he has two opponents. One of them is Tiger Worku, who seems to be positioning himself as the more progressive lefty candidate. However, Tiger Worku also has some history of his own to contend with and some possible ethical issues. There's been some reporting on his past as president of the Sewer Neighborhood Group and some things that went down during that time and alleged mismanagement and other issues there. There's also been some alleged fraud in the Ward 6 convention where allegedly, Tiger Worku signed up a bunch of people who may not even ask to be involved in Ward 6.
There was a Republican who was quoted in Minnesota Reformer who's like, no, I didn't sign up for this. No, I don't want to be involved with the DFL, and somehow managed to find himself on the Tiger Worku's delegate list. And it was more widespread than just that one person because I know, so he had an unusually high number of delegates with Proton, like that highly secure email service, Proton Mail, using the same email service. They were almost
exclusively Proton Mail, which is not a well-known service. I would say on a normal list, you might see a couple of people using Proton Mail, but it's normally, Gmail and stuff like that.
So do you remember what the explanation was? Was it that our delegates don't have email and we signed them up for it? We signed them up for these email addresses? Is that what the explanation ended up being?
Yeah, I'm not fully buying that because I believe some of those people did have email addresses, but their explanation seemed to be that whether or not they had email addresses, they were going to provide laptops for everyone to use, and they're going to have everyone gather in a central location. I'm a little skeptical of that, but that's what they said. But at any event, ultimately, possibly in part due to what happened with the Worku campaign, the Ward 6 convention never happened.
So we never got to find out if those delegates were real.
We did not. And then the third, technically is the fourth candidate, but I'd say the third and last major candidate in Ward 6 is Casey Muggan, probably also positioning himself to the left of Osmond somewhat. He is endorsed by Stonewall DFL. He does also have some endorsements you might not expect for someone given his positioning, because he's also endorsed by the Senior Caucus, but I think that might be due to some of Osmond's ethical issues.
Yeah. I think there are just so many potentially embarrassing outcomes in Ward 6 that Muggan is the one you could support. And the least chance of embarrassing yourself down the road when some big scandal happens and you realize you made a big mistake.
And I will say, I said for the other two candidates, there's various reporting about ethical issues. I'm not aware of anything like that at this time for Casey Muggan. So he's got that going for him against his two opponents. And then like Guy Gaskin is also running as a Republican, and I don't expect we'll get a serious percentage of the vote.
I recognize that name. Did he run before?
Yeah, he ran in 2021 for Ward 2. I think he actually screwed up in 2021, and he does, in fact, live in Ward 6.
Election fraud.
Election fraud. Correct ward this time. Well, I don't know if it was fraud so much as that he was honestly confused about which ward because I think he lives like close to the border, and it's kind of a wonky border in some places.
Is ignorance of the law a defense, Josh?
That's a good question.
I don't think so. That's a lawyer phrase, isn't it? Ignorance of the law is not a defense, I think.
I'm not a lawyer. I cannot provide legal advice over whether it is a legitimate defense if you thought you lived in the correct ward and in fact did not. But in any event, the 2021 election is in the rearview mirror now. He's running in Ward 6 this year, and to the best of my knowledge, he does, in fact, live in Ward 6.
Okay. Do we need to do Ward 7? We should do Ward 7. We didn't give it the full treatment. Scott Graham is basically the more conservative old guard candidate who is in line with Lisa Goodman on most things. And if you don't know, Lisa Goodman spent a quarter century in office opposing all that was good in the world, just wreaking havoc at City Hall. Katie Cashman is the more progressive candidate. I like her. I don't know what else to say. Do I need to say more about her? Works in like I think she has an impressive background, and I'm not doing justice to it. But
yeah, I'm remembering correctly. She works for Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy.
Yeah, Scott Graham is a landlord. Nothing wrong with that. But I have friends who have been his tenants who said they had a bad experience with him as their landlord. Allegedly,
I have also not heard good things about Scott Graham's landlord and property management experience.
Another thing that rubbed me the wrong way about Scott Graham was that so he was like the Congressional District 5 chair. Am I right about that for the DFL?
Yeah, still is to the best of my knowledge.
Still is. And I think it was at a CD5 convention where you're electing delegates to go to the state convention, and so there's too many people who want to be delegates, not enough slots. And the solution for that is like make people vote, but that takes a while. So people like, maybe some people should just not decide not to go, looking for volunteers not to go. And he gives this spiel about how expensive it's going to be, trying to convince people who are like less well off that they shouldn't take them up on it and be delegates. And that rubbed me the wrong way. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but like, I just thought it was emblematic of what kind of an asshole he is. He just seems like an asshole. Sorry, Scott. He refused to come on the Wedge Live podcast. I would have been so nice to him, but he refused, so I can call him an asshole now.
Well, I think all of the candidates in that political alignment have refused to come on the Wedge Live podcast, so it seems to be a trend.
You know who wanted to come on the Wedge Live podcast and called me out on Twitter about it? I will admit to this. Tiger Worku.
I did see that.
And so, living up to my previous comments, I just didn't want to embarrass myself and have it look like if he was the only one who came on the Wedge Live podcast, that would kind of look like an endorsement. And you know who I don't want to look like I'm endorsing this year is Tiger Worku. No, not at all.
Yep.
I don't want to be affiliated with this person. So that's my explanation for why I forgot to respond to Tiger's email.
I do remember, your post about your thought process for endorsing candidates, and one of them was like, "Is this candidate likely to embarrass me in the future?" And that's something more people should consider when
as I get older, I am more hesitant to make in personal it's a Wedge Live endorsement, but it's kind of a personal endorsement because I am Wedge Live.
Yeah.
And I just, like, in my old age, I am more hesitant to attach my name to anyone. So I don't even know if I'm going to make endorsements this year. Breaking news.
Well, I'll keep an eye out either way for my endorsement tracker.
Okay. It's an honor just to be considered for the Josh Martin endorsement tracker. That I would even rate highly enough to be included on your Google Doc is quite an honor.
Yeah.
Let's put in a plug for Josh Martin's Google Docs. How do we get to your Google Docs? You're tracking campaign finance. You're tracking all kinds of other things. How do I get there?
The best way, and I do need to just create a real website or at least a bit.ly link at some point. The best way is probably just to go to my Twitter, which is at Josh Martin MPLS, and then it's
the link in your bio.
There's a link in the bio, and there's a pinned post right at the top that'll take you to the directory. So either way. So I think that's the easiest way to get there.
Ward 7, Katie Cashman, I think is my clear preference there, which means she is a long shot to actually win.
And because it's Ward 7.
Yeah, because she is not a high quality person who isn't working hard, and but it's tough. She could probably use some support. Ward 8. Is this my turn, Josh? Is this your turn or my turn?
Well, you might as well take this one since I have a conflict of interest for Ward 8 as Soren Stevenson's treasurer.
Yeah, Josh Martin is Soren Stevenson's treasurer, and you're also a Soren Stevenson tribute band because
that's true. Yes.
In a crowd, it would be impossible. As
decreed
to
by
tell the
Wedge
difference.
Live. Yep.
Okay, Soren Stevenson is the what is Soren Stevenson's profession?
My understanding is he is not currently employed.
Like
he has worked. He's worked previously as a policy advocate for different organizations.
Okay. And like famously lost an eye during the 2020 protests, George Floyd protests, right?
That's correct. Yes.
So a little bio on Soren Stevenson. He's the progressive challenger. I can just hear campaigns listening to this and being very disappointed with how I describe the candidates. You can tell I pay attention to city politics, can't you? So he's a progressive challenger. Andrea Jenkins is the longtime council aide, famously the first black transgender woman elected to city council, definitely in Minneapolis, but I think she's kind of broken some records nationally in that way.
Yep.
But from my perspective, has tended to be on the conservative side of the council, and that is borne out by the fact that her coalition on the council is people like Lisa Goodman and Michael Rainville and everyone who voted to put her as a council president. I've been disappointed in her leadership. Things like the rent stabilization ordinance, kind of dilly-dallied for a year and a half on that and didn't move it forward. When you're a council president, you've got a lot of power and you have the responsibility to move some things forward. And despite the fact that she said she supports it, kind of got left by the wayside and nothing happened on it, and felt like the clock ran out on that as it seemed there were council members who said they support it and were willing to come up with some solutions. So that's just an example of the way I've been disappointed in her leadership as council president. Also, we'll get into the campaign finance stuff later, but I saw today, and it's probably been mentioned all over the place, Barb Johnson is donating to Andrea Jenkins' campaign. That's a scandal. That rates as a scandal in my book because I'm not a fan of Barb Johnson. If people don't know, Barb Johnson is like the clever version of Michael Rainville. And if you don't know who Michael Rainville is, he's Barb Johnson's cousin. So to do some circular logic to figure that one out. Josh, can you fill in the blanks where I failed to do either of these candidates justice? Because you may be Soren Stevenson's treasurer, but you will certainly have more information to bring to this discussion than I apparently do.
I think I should probably mention that Soren is the DFL endorsed candidate in Ward 8, which He's the only challenger who managed to pull that off and get the DFL endorsement over the incumbent. So I think that's a big thing to mention. There was a MinPost article recently covering the Ward 8 race. That was kind of a profile of Andrea Jenkins, where she laid out her opinions on why the race was not going her way, and the author of that piece, Kyle Stokes, also interviewed some supporters of the Soren Stevenson campaign as well to get their own takes. So Andrea suggested essentially that the reason she was not doing as well is because she's a Black trans woman. Supporters pushed back on that and suggested no, if anything, that's helping her case, and that it's the fact that a lot of people in the ward disagree with her on policies and positions she has taken. That is the reason she's struggling in this election.
She really blamed being a Black trans woman as the reason people were not willing to support her.
Yeah, did you not see this piece?
I read the part where she's talking about yard signs, because basically I have a Google alert for yard signs and I only read the yard sign news.
Oh, so you just zoomed in on the yard signs. That was the
I'm ashamed to admit I only read the tweet about that article.
It's actually a very good article, and I think I would encourage reading the whole thing. Regardless of your stances on the race, I think it does a pretty fair job of.
So I read the part where she's like, I see people with their Black Lives Matter signs and they're all their welcome yard signs, and yet here I am, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, as a Black trans woman, and people aren't supporting me. I didn't know that she was attributing an affirmative sort of bias against her in Ward 8 is the reason a lot of people aren't supporting her.
And yet and this is quoting Jenkins, and yet as a Black woman, my voice is criticized and or minimized. I would have to look through it more.
So I guess
I don't think we have time to read through the whole thing right now. But I think there are points in the article where she hints at that.
Yeah. And it does hint at it in that comment. I think in Ward 8, it buys her more credibility than not, because Ward 8 is an extremely progressive place. And the people who are opposing Andrea Jenkins are definitely doing it from the left. This is not a secret
yes,
anti-Black, anti-trans campaign being run against her.
There are also two other candidates in Ward 8.
We don't need to talk about them, do we? Bob Sulentrop, who is what did he call himself? A Republican last time?
Yeah, he failed to spell Republican correctly on his website last time, so it said he was a Republican candidate. And then we have Terry White, who ran as a Green Party candidate last time and is now running as a DFL candidate.
I think he ran as a Green Party candidate in 2017, not last time, though.
In 2017, correct. He did not run in 2021. So we have ghosts of elections past in Ward 8.
So getting into the history, so Andrea Jenkins has never had a serious opponent.
Until now, yep.
And that's sorry, Bob Sulentrop and Terry White, for downgrading you from serious opponent. Andrea Jenkins has never had a serious opponent. And in 2017... the field was basically cleared for her by DFL insiders. What's the next one? We're looking at 12.
We can probably skip 9.
We can. Oh, should we do 10? Let's not skip 10.
We should probably talk about 10. But yeah, Ward 9, Jason Chavez has no real opponent.
I live in Ward 10.
Ward 10 is interesting.
Incumbent Aisha Chugtai, this is her first term on the city council. She is DFL endorsed after a very eventful Ward 10 convention experience that went on endlessly, it seemed. There was the famous storming of the stage by Nasri Warsame's campaign. So we weren't able to finish the business that day. And eventually, it was like a month later, Warsame was banned from being able to seek the endorsement.
Yep.
Chugtai was endorsed in a virtual ballot. Warsame gives me bad vibes, Josh.
Yeah, I think that's fair given what happened at the War 10 convention. And I mean, not just that, but a lot of stuff he posts on some of his campaign socials and everything. But especially because of the, storming of the stage at the War 10 convention.
Also, I was removed from a Warsame campaign press conference. I'm not going to let that go.
Right, yeah, that was the genesis of the allowed to be here badge.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if people can read this, but this is a PVC press badge that I printed myself. This is allowed to be here. I'm going to unclip it, and I'm going to put it up to the camera so people realize this. I'm holding it up to the camera right now. It says allowed to be here. It even has a date on it. Valid 2023. It says press, allowed to be here. And yet I was kicked from Warsame press conference. I don't know what they thought I would do. I mean, I pretty faithfully communicated what happened at the Ward 10 convention. I released the video of it. And I wasn't impressed with his campaign as a result. And I said it. There's also Bruce, I don't know how to pronounce this, Dacus?
I think it's Dacus, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
Dachis. And his claim to fame is that he was attached to the Don Samuels police staffing lawsuit. I think he's a developer, or at least he put like a metal structure on top of a building in the wedge where I think he lives.
He's a developer or commercial real estate broker or like something in that general space of jobs.
Yeah, and I don't think he stands much of a chance. Like, it's Ward 10, it's very progressive. I don't think a candidate of like crime resentment stands a chance here. And that's basically the segment of politics he's coming from. I don't know if he realizes he doesn't stand a chance, but getting in the last minute, you can tell he comes from the Samuels wing of the DFL. It's kind of a protest campaign, in effect.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And Greg Klein running under the Abolish Bike Lanes party or principle.
That's right.
When he filled out his,
I assume principle. I am not aware of an official Abolish Bike Lanes party, but maybe there is one.
What are the requirements for starting your own party? Is it just enough to fill out a line on a campaign filing saying?
No, I don't think that cuts it. So I think he's going with the or principle part of that.
So basically all segments of War 10 politics are represented. Anti-bike lane sentiment, crime resentment, people who like to storm the stage at a political convention and force everyone to leave the building. And Aisha Chugtai, the incumbent, far left, socialist, extremist.
And I this is consistent with what Ward 10's had to deal with for a while. Like even when Lisa Bender was in office, there was people from a very small but very motivated part of the ward trying to run challengers against her.
Yeah, and it never comes to much of anything. It's just Ward 10's just always going to have progressive leadership unless the boundaries of it change significantly. Like there's too much Wedge and Whittier involved.
Well, and if anything, it's probably going to become more progressive through redistricting. That I would say that's probably what happened in this last cycle, is it shed some of its more outlying areas.
That's true.
If population continues to grow there, which seems likely, they keep building housing there, then it'll keep shrinking more to the progressive core.
Yeah, it's a very politically active place, and which is kind of what I love and hate about it. But like for a long time, we only had council members from a small part of the wedge. Like weird fact, I think Lisa McDonald had 2 terms in like the late 90s, early 2000s. She lived in the wedge, like not far from where I live. Meg Tuthill, elected 2009, lived in the wedge, very close to where I live. Lisa Bender lived in the wedge. She was elected in 2013, served until 2021, lived in the wedge. It's like from a very small part of the ward. And so it's not even the most progressive part of the ward. Whittier is further to the left of the wedge. And once we lost East Isles, you're just not going to have a successful anti-progressive campaign, which is probably a good way to refer to some of these campaigns as anti-progressive, because people get confused. But everyone's DFL. Well, so there are more conservative DFLers, more moderate, and these people are running on resentment, crime resentment. So it's certainly a conservative impulse, if not on the spectrum of what you would typically consider to be conservative. Okay. Ward 12. Josh, I'll let you do Ward 12.
Ward 12 is another battleground ward. There's technically 3 candidates here. I guess I'll get the third one out of the way first. Nancy Ford is running again. She ran as an independent in 2021, got about 30% of the vote against Andrew Johnson. She's running as a DFL candidate this time. Did not do well in the DFL convention, finished a very distant 4th. I don't expect she's going to be a serious contender in this race, so it's going to come down to the 2 main candidates, Aureen Chowdhury and Luther Ranheim. Aureen is policy aide to Jason Chavez. She's the DFL and DSA endorsed candidate. After a lot of rigmarole, ended up winning the DFL endorsement on the first ballot at the convention. She has attracted a wide swath of endorsements for somebody who's running in an open seat, including the current Ward 12 council member, Andrew Johnson. And she's running against Luther Ranheim, who works as he works in philanthropy, so fundraising, but with big money people, and raises money for various nonprofit organizations. I forget exactly which one he's working with right now. And he's probably the more mainstream, further right DFL,
Anti-progressive.
Anti-progressive, yeah, that was the term
go.
we came up with. Anti-progressive candidate. I'd say Aureen's in a pretty strong position in this one.
Yeah, of all the battlegrounds that could flip in a different way, I'd say she's like the most impressively front runner seeming progressive candidate because of the endorsements. Has her fundraising been impressive too?
Let me check quick.
But all the organizations, the fact that the incumbent, who is not as progressive, who's kind of a centrist on the council, Andrew Johnson, has endorsed her. She has collected endorsements in a way that makes you think all these people expect her to win, or they really like her. A pretty impressive performance at the DFL convention. I was struck by how many, I don't know, I go into a political convention, I see a lot of older white people. I make assumptions about these people, but a healthy chunk of them were supporting her at that convention. So pretty diverse base of support she's got. It's not like it's just a tiny section of the ward supporting her from appearances at the convention, at least. So it seems like an impressive front-running campaign. We talked about Luther. You called him, you said he was in philanthropy, and I thought that was an uncharitable way to describe someone.
I mean, I think that's
so
basically
fancy.
what they call it.
Sounds so fancy.
He works for the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation as their gift planner. So, yeah, it's fundraising, but with big money.
Are there any notable fundraising headlines? I'll restate what I thought was notable about Andrea Jenkins, and I kind of noticed it last time around too. What's the guy's name who's the head of the Minneapolis area Chamber of Commerce? What's that guy's name? Jonathan Weinhagen?
Yeah.
When his only donations were to Jacob Frey and Andrea Jenkins, you kind of knew what you were getting with Andrea Jenkins. Shame on you, Ward 8. you knew what you were doing in 2021. You could see it in the donations. But this year it's even more stark because there are people like the Downtown Council. I think Steve Kramer's on there, DFL Senior Caucus. Yeah. The thing that just really blew me out of my pants, if that's a phrase, is Barb Johnson's donation. That's the most untouchable segment of Minneapolis politics for me. So for some people, it's the police union. For me, it's Barb Johnson. When I see that name, I run.
Yeah,
it's a scary donor list there. She had a pretty impressive haul. Anything else stand out in terms of fundraising this year? Because the pre-primary reports came in mid-July.
July 29th was the deadline for the pre-primary reports.
Holy crap, Josh! We're 44 minutes into this.
Yeah. Oh man. Fundraising highlights. Michael Rainville and Kate Mortensen both raised a ton of money. There's other people who raised a lot of money, but they're definitely the two front runners, both over $70,000. There were some interesting. So Nasir Warsami's report was interesting in that he filed it all, for one thing. So a lot of people were questioning whether he would. He raised about $23,000. There were some interesting things about his report. There was some question about whether his expenses were comprehensive, because I didn't see any mention of like T-shirts or signs on there, which were very visible at the Ward 10 convention. The donors list was also interesting in that. So there is an option in state law where you can provide a form to have the donor's address restricted if the donor signs forms saying they need to do that for concerns about their safety. But Nasri didn't provide the address for any of his donors, which is a little unusual.
Did he provide any donors at all?
Candidate. He provided a list of donors, but he provided no addresses, and I believe the occupation or employer for all of them was listed as consultant. So a little unusual.
Oh, who I'm thinking of is Tiger Warku didn't provide a list.
You're thinking of Tiger Warku. We'll get to him next. So Tiger Warku had an even more unusual campaign finance report in which he says he raised about $48,000, listed it all as one lump sum contribution from pre-primary report. So did not itemize any of his donors, which is a big problem, especially if any of his donors gave over $100, which seems likely if he managed to raise $48,000.
Well, it was listed in the itemized section, right? It wasn't even listed in the under 100 section. It was
correct. So what you're supposed to do in the new campaign finance system in MapLight is you are supposed to enter in every contribution you receive into the system, and then the system automatically calculates which ones are supposed to be itemized and which ones aren't. He did not do that. He entered one itemized donation listed pre-primary report as the donor for $48,000. And then in addition to that, he, despite raising all that money, spent all of it in the pre-primary period, and in fact, I believe is slightly negative for cash on hand right now.
Really?
And had some interesting expenses, like it was like $17,000 for consulting. He spent a couple $1,000s on travel, which is not something you see on a local candidate's report very often. There was a lot of, I think there was like $10,000 or $15,000 on tech. So maybe those were all those laptops he bought for the convention. Maybe they really bought them. I don't know. It was a fascinating finance report to look at.
And so a word about people messing up on their campaign finance report, whether it's intentional or a mistake, there's really it's not enforced in any strenuous way, and it relies on complaints. So if no one
Yeah.
dislikes you enough to say, hey, I'm going to take the time to fill out this form and get it to the right place, it's not going to be enforced. But the whole like not itemizing your donors thing feels like a big mistake. Even to the point where conspiratorially, I'm thinking, I mean, you could just lie about money you received, right? Say, hey, yeah, sure, I raised $50,000, I spent it all. Look how impressive I am. Who is to stop you from pretending you raised a ton of money and looking like a formidable campaign? I know this sounds very conspiratorial, but if you're the kind of person who makes up delegates and assigns them all Proton email addresses, why wouldn't you just say, yeah, I raised $50,000 and it's all gone?
Yeah, and I mean, certainly people could do that, but even what you're describing is potentially small potatoes. And I want to make clear, I'm not accusing Tiger Worko or anyone else of necessarily doing this.
Hypothetical candidate
hypothetically, the rules for reporting what you do with your expenditures are quite loose. So someone hypothetically could legitimately raise a bunch of money,
right,
and then just spend all that
misappropriate
money on themselves. And because the campaign finance, I mean, certainly you can lie on your campaign finance report, but even if you were not to lie, like the descriptions of expenses are so vague that you could get away with quite a bit. Now, I'm not advocating anyone do this. I hope no one is doing this, and everyone is being honest and forthright in their campaign finance reports and compliant with the law and supporting transparency in our democracy. But yeah, there's some areas, I think, especially at the local level, where they could be tightened up. It does seem at the state level that there's a little more of an enforcement body for these things. But I think we've got a ways to go on the local level.
Remember the Wedge Live maxim, never support a candidate or endorse a candidate who could potentially embarrass you in the future? I think campaign finance reports, and like I'm not talking about small mistakes like missing a deadline, being a couple of days late, stuff like that, but like messing up real big on your campaign finance report is a sign that you do a poor job of managing a small organization of people, which a campaign is, and like making sure small things, because this is not really all that difficult. It's just not difficult to get your campaign finance right. Like it's a lot of tracking stuff and pay attention to details, but it's not the hardest thing in the world. And if you can't get that right, it's a potentially bad sign of the way you will lose track of things once in office. So it kind of worth paying attention to in that regard.
And I think in particular, making sure it's someone's ability to hire a team and have somebody to manage those things. If you have a campaign, there's a lot to keep track of, and it is good to have somebody assigned specifically to do the role of treasurer rather than trying to take on all of that yourself.
And it's one of the easier roles on a campaign, because a lot of these donations are coming in online. You're just like popping numbers into a spreadsheet. There's not that much to keep track of. You just have to know this set of rules and adhere to them.
I think there's a little more to it than that, John, speaking as a treasurer myself.
No, it's not that hard. Just admit it, Josh. Are you saying your role as Soren Stevenson's treasurer is difficult for you, master of the spreadsheets?
I don't know. It is. I wouldn't necessarily say it's difficult in the sense that it's hard and I don't know what to do in a given situation. But there is work that goes into it. Like even if it is stuff in ActBlue, you have to export that stuff. There's a new system that you have to enter it all into. You have to make sure to keep track of a bunch of different things to make sure you're not going over any maximums for a certain person or different things like that. And while a lot of the donations come in online, which does make it easier. Absolutely true. They don't all come in online still, so those require a little more effort. I think you're right that it's maybe not as hard as people make it out to be, but I don't know that I would quite say it's easy and it's not work at all.
It's simple. It's simple.
All right.
You know,
Johnson's campaign finance.
I used to have my own PAC. I had my own PAC. We raised multiple thousands of dollars.
That made it easier. That's a relatively small amount.
I mean, the less you raise, the easier it gets.
That's true.
Lesson for future
The less
campaigns.
you raise, the less you spend, the easier it is. Yep.
You know who I think is going to be offended by potentially listening to this episode if she does listen? Can you guess?
I cannot guess. No.
Ward 13 candidate Kate Mortensen. Josh, we don't consider her viable. Is that right? Is that what I am to take from the fact that we overlooked
didn't
her?
even talk about Ward 13, which I was surprised about because
she raised more. She doubled up contributions of Paul Massano, and yet neither of us is taking her all that seriously. I think it's half an oversight and half just a recognition that Paul Massano has won too much credibility, friendship from the mayor and downtown council types. That
it is impressive how much Kate Mortensen raised, but I think she's still very much fighting an uphill battle against Paul Massano. I think it's going to be very difficult for her to win. And it's true that she raised more than Paul Massano, but Paul Massano already had money in the bank from previous years as well, which evens things out somewhat. And on these campaign finance things, I've kind of looked at I kind of went back and looked at 2021. Like it didn't really seem to make a huge difference of like this person raised more than this person. If you saw a situation where somebody raised like very little money, like that was a bad sign. Or if somebody, didn't file campaign finance reports at all, that's not a good sign. But if two candidates are both raising a pretty significant amount of money, even if one of them is raising a little bit more than the other, I don't know that we can read too much into that. I don't know that Mortensen really has that much of an advantage based on her fundraising against Paul Massano.
Josh, we probably only have time to talk about one more thing. Should it be this poll?
Sure.
This poll released by this new PAC called Minneapolis for the Many.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about Minneapolis for the Many in general, including the poll.
It's a new progressive PAC, Minneapolis for the Many. And one of the things they did, they hired a real pollster. This was not a Twitter poll,
Yep.
Josh Martin. This was a real, fairly highly rated pollster. I think 538 rates PPP polls as an A- on their pollster rankings. So it's not a terrible pollster who's just gonna do shoddy work.
Was there a particular one you were interested in, the favorables and unfavorables, or the issues?
Two of the issues are interesting to me: the rent stabilization results and the sidewalk shoveling thing, municipal sidewalk clearing thing is interesting. I thought Mayor Frey's favorables compared to Walz and Biden is interesting. I think some of the lesser figures, the fact that no one could tell you who any of them are, not as interesting. Like, it's interesting. It's, you can say, well, Latricia Vitaw is more unfavorable than favorable, but 68% of the people were just not, probably couldn't tell you who she is. So I don't know how big a deal that is.
Yeah, so we can go through it. So it did ask favorable or unfavorable opinion of Joe Biden, Tim Walz, Jacob Frey, Ilhan Omar. Those results, I think, are somewhat interesting. Biden was approved, disapproved 68-20. Walz 74-17. Frey had favorable of 31% and unfavorable of 48%. And I should say, and we'll get into this a little bit later, all of these approve, disapprove questions are all written very straightforwardly. It just says, do you approve or disapprove of President Joe Biden's job performance? And all the others just say, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of this person? So And then the last probably interesting favorable unfavorable is Ilhan Omar, 51% favorable, 33% unfavorable. They did also ask about County Commissioner Angela Conley and council members Emily Koski, Robin Wansley, and Letitia Vata. I don't think those are too interesting. They all had very, very high not sure ratings, like in the 70% range, which makes sense. I would think most people, especially if this isn't their representative, aren't going to know who these people are.
I think it's a good sign for your future viability for running against Elon next time. If no one knows who you are, so they can spring these people on us at the last minute. Say, look at this shiny new person. I thought it was interesting that among the not sure, which is I don't know who this person is, Emily Koski had the highest not sure of 71%, which means nobody knows who she is.
I mean, what the others varied from like 68% to.
I'm gonna pretend.
So
I'm gonna pretend it's significant, Josh.
Okay. And then the last favorable unfavorable was the Minneapolis Police Department, 28% favorable, 55% unfavorable. I don't think that's a surprising result. And then the other questions, which have gotten a lot.
Let's talk about the MPD thing, though, first.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it is interesting that Mayor Frey is approaching MPD levels of unfavorability.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting that, like, the Ilhan question and the MPD question are kind of like not quite mirror images of each other, but it's I can imagine like the kind of person who likes Ilhan. It's like these are the Minneapolis political parties, people who have a favorable opinion of MPD and people who have a favorable opinion of Ilhan Omar. There might not be total overlap in those numbers, but similar.
So then the issue questions, and this has gotten a lot of discussion, and a lot of the criticism has been about the wording of these questions. I will say it is absolutely true that all of these issue questions are clearly written with a particular slant in mind.
I mean, they're so simplified that it makes it hard to say no. Actually, I don't care about people being priced out of their homes. Like, the issue is doesn't quite walk you to how complicated the potential solution would be or how costly it would be, not presenting like an argument for why maybe this would be difficult or expensive. So
basically each of these was about 2/3 support, actually less than 1/3 opposed, because there were a lot of people not sure, but about 2/3 support for, again, very slanted wording, so take it with a grain of salt, for support for municipal sidewalk clearing, rent stabilization, a housing first policy, and expanding ballot initiatives in Minneapolis so that they could be used on ordinances instead of just charter amendments, which is how it works currently in Minneapolis.
I think I oppose that one. I think I'm in the 13% who oppose enacting ordinances by ballot measures. I think
by ballot measure.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Josh? Do you support it or oppose it?
It's an interesting question. We'll see what happens when it comes up. Direct democracy issues are interesting. I think there's potentially some merit in it, but there's certainly some concerns as well. So I guess we'll see what happens.
You're really hedging there, Josh. Are you running for office?
No, I'm not running for office.
You're a parliamentarian. This seems like the kind of thing you would definitely have an opinion on.
I would say ballot measures have in recent years been used to do a lot of good. I think they're doing a lot of good work with ballot initiatives for protecting abortion rights, protecting voting rights in a lot of states. On the other hand, it has also been used to do things like in California and other states, like limiting the ways in which the state could raise taxes or things like that. In California, again, it can get a little out of hand where they just have countless ballot measures on the ballot in any given year. So I think it is something that would need to be considered very carefully how it's implemented if it's something we were to implement. And if we were to add it, it is something that were to require a charter amendment. So that would be a whole process to go through.
So I think a strong argument for why the council should have taken action on rent stabilization this year is because I prefer that it be done through a legislative process. And the more you stonewall it, the more likely it pressures people to say, well, we need to start doing this stuff through the ballot. If they won't do it, we need to do it for them. If the council won't do it, we do it. And I think the way it was done in St. Paul did not work out well. I don't like that particular policy. I think Minneapolis needs a different policy than what St. Paul enacted. And I don't know if a ballot measure has the enough give and take, the back and forth, that results in a well thought out policy. It's subject to a lot of heat and passion and not enough is this going to work out? So.
Yeah, and I think that's something for council members to consider, because I think that rent stabilization vote is certainly one that people will be keeping in mind for this. There actually was a charter amendment proposed in 2021 to allow citizen petitions for ballot measures on rent stabilization, but it got vetoed by the mayor, and there weren't enough votes to override that. So that one did not go on the ballot. Only the one that allowed the council to put rent stabilization measures in the ballot ended up passing.
Another thing on rent stabilization is we had a vote on rent stabilization in 2021, and I think that came out to like 53% supported creating a mechanism by which it could be enacted.
Correct.
And so the result in this poll, which I think asked in a way to maximize the number of people who would possibly support it.
Yes.
That's a significant difference between the result in 21 and this poll, I think, is explained by the fact that this is all voters being polled and not strictly voters who would have turned out for a city election, which is potentially a more conservative electorate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's partly due to the wording of the poll, and it's also due to the fact that, how do you determine likely voters for a municipal election?
Oh, it probably would not have been
especially for
possible
one
to
like
do.
this, right?
Yeah.
So they probably are doing all voters. The actual electorate may not look quite the same and will not look quite the same, but it's hard to predict what that'll be. What else was I going to say in that? The other thing to consider is this question just asked, do you support a rent stabilization policy, writ large? It's a lot easier to say yes to that and a lot harder to say yes to a specific rent stabilization policy with details in it, which ultimately is what people will be asked to do, because under state law, even if the council passes something, that still needs to go on the ballot to be approved by voters. So we'll see that will probably also shrink this margin, is when they're like, well, I like rent stabilization as a theory. I don't know if I like this specific policy. So you'll probably see some of that.
Do you think the mayor is going to veto the rideshare ordinance?
I don't know. He certainly seems to be sending some signals that that's possible. It wasn't the harshest criticism, but he definitely seemed to be raising some questions about the policy, and said it was being, I think he kind of said it was being rushed through and had it been well considered, and that they should be following the process that the governor's task force is using to come up with something, which is also what some of the people at the public hearing that were opposing the policy said, and also what Uber and Lyft have been saying similar things as well. So I think it's definitely possible he will veto it, which makes the margin on Thursday's vote pretty important.
You know what I look forward to? I look forward to, if he does veto, I look forward to contrasting, because I expect he'll say something like, think of the people who depend on this affordable transportation options to get them around the city. I'm thinking of them. And I look forward to contrasting that with his veto of bus lanes, because I've got an idea for like a public option for rideshare, and it's called public transit. And I don't, this mayor is kind of a joke when it comes to supporting actual public transit. So I'm preparing myself to be very, I'm gonna say some mean things about whatever the mayor says when he vetoes this. Prepare yourself for some mean comments. Also, I'm torn on this rideshare thing. I think it's reasonable to expect you work this job, you make the equivalent of the minimum wage, you have some like basic protections. I don't know if poor working conditions are the way we should be ensuring that we deliver essential public services like transportation to people. I don't know if that's the mechanism. I think there's like a policy solution that doesn't rely on poor working conditions and low wages and abusive labor practices. But I think it's conceivable that prices will go up. Fewer people will be taking rideshare, less business for drivers potentially. And I don't know if drivers have this expectation. Like, I think maybe some of them expect there will be the same number of riders. They will just be getting a larger share of the money. I don't know if that's true. Do you ride rideshare, Josh?
I occasionally ride Uber. Yeah.
And so for me, someone who doesn't rely on Uber or Lyft, and I think they're kind of destructive in their practices, I'm not as invested as a driver would be in the outcome for the companies themselves. So in that way, I'm torn. Do you have any thoughts on this, Josh? This question of rideshare regulation?
Yeah, I mean, Uber and Lyft claim that if this passes, it will significantly raise costs. You know, it's certainly in their best interest to say that, but it also does make some sense to a point. They might be exaggerating a little bit, but you know, if their costs go up, it does seem logical that some of that will likely be passed on to consumers. That's how these things tend to work. They do also say that they would likely cut back or cease operations in Minneapolis. I'm a little more, I don't know. It's hard to tell whether that threat is legit or not. But we may find out whether they'll follow through on that. And I do think it raises the question of even if that's true, like, should we, you know, continue to allow them to exploit workers? And if it's true that the only way Uber and Lyft can be a successful business is to exploit their workers, does that mean we should continue to let them exploit their workers so they can be a successful business? I would say probably no. Like, if they can't make their business model work, then maybe we need to find some other way of filling that need, such as improving our public transportation system, or maybe find some other entrepreneur can find some other way to do it that Uber and Lyft are not doing it. I don't know.
They've embedded themselves into our transportation reality. Like, I will take it like once every couple of years if I like arrive at the airport from visiting my mom and like the trains aren't running. It's so late. I got a flight that came in so late that the trains aren't running anymore, and I have to take it, but I don't rely on it. But other people, when they travel, they just expect to be able to like open up their phone and do it. It's just like an expectation people have. This is like a utility that I can access wherever I go. Yeah. And so it's become so essential that elected officials feel like, well, we have no choice. We're at their mercy.
Right.
But I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, they could just go away and die, and we'd be better off. But I don't use it. I don't make my money from it. So.
Yeah, and while I use it sometimes, I would not say I rely on it. Like, for the trips I use it for, I could find other ways to make those trips. But I know there are some people who do rely on it.
But the idea that like it will be affordable for you to have someone show up in their car, pick you up, and take you wherever you want to go, That's just not going to be affordable. That's unless you vastly underpay your workers and subject them to poor working conditions. That's just not going to be the affordable option. Or the idea that they would keep it affordable forever once they kill off public transit and all your alternatives. If you're trapped with the driverless Uber of the future, you're going to be paying an arm and a leg to get around. Okay, Josh, this episode went really long. I thought we would have time to talk about a whole bunch of other things that are happening in the world, but it takes a long time to run down and give our superficial analysis of all these battlegrounds in election 2021. You can hear in my voice that I'm just exhausted by this. Do you have any recommendations?
Oh, do I have any recommendations?
What are you enjoying? What's making Josh Martin smile?
I started watching the new season of Only Murders in the Building. Been enjoying that so far. So yeah, that's one thing I can think of.
Well, thank you, Josh Martin.
Yep.
This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.